Welcome back, my wonderful viewers. In this video, I'm going to debunk the second episode in the Evolutionless series titled Evolutionless, Episode 2, Definitions and Darwin's Finches. Already, I haven't yet seen any part of the video, but this one seems like it's going to be better than the previous video because this one sets out to define its terms prior to using them, something the last video surely didn't do. Now, without further ado, let's turn our attention to the episode.
When I hear the word evolution, it has many meanings and we have to define the word.
Correct. Evolution does have several different definitions, not all of which are scientific. One is simply change over time, and that could refer to animals, plants, cars, televisions, etc. Another, the more pertinent one here, is change in allele frequency in a population over time. I imagine that since the author has made a point of starting off with the fact that evolution has multiple meanings, he or she will define it for us. Again, the author says evolutionist instead of evolutionary biologist, or at least the plural of evolutionist. Now, I don't think biologists are taking advantage of the varying definitions of evolution to confuse anyone. In fact, I just pointed out that there's more than one definition. Second, I'm glad the author plans to define the word. Let's see this definition and where the problem actually is.
All right, what is evolution? Well, it can mean one of three things. First of all, it can mean that organisms change when they go to new environments.
First, evolution doesn't necessarily mean that organisms change when they go to new environments. That's vaguely allopatric speciation, even though he never said that organisms speciate when they go to new environments. To be clear, speciation and macroevolution are interchangeable. Essentially, what the first guy said isn't a definition of anything, and besides, organisms don't have to go to new environments to evolve into new species. Sympatric speciation is when organisms speciate in the same environment, like plants going through polyploidy or organisms in general going through genetic drift. Lastly on this point, microevolution isn't the same as evolution. Microevolution is genetic change below the level of species. Another way to put it is that microevolution is a type of evolution. The two words aren't synonymous.
Second meaning of evolution is the idea of common ancestry. And that can refer to universal common ancestry, the idea that all organisms are connected by what Darwin called descent from modification from one single simple form, simple primordial form way back when, or it could be a more limited thesis that certain groups of organisms are related by common ancestry. But the Darwinian idea was that the history of life is best represented as a kind of tree of life. And he actually drew a tree in the origin to depict this, where the branches at the top of the tree represent all the forms of life that exist today. The trunk or the root of that tree represents that first primordial form, and the ones that only made it halfway up are the ones that got extinct. So it's a visual depiction of his idea about the history of life.
Again, like microevolution, common ancestry isn't synonymous with evolution. Common ancestry is an idea within evolution that says non-descendants share ancestry, which is true of all organisms. Common ancestry has been proved beyond a reasonable doubt by homologies in all organisms, such as energy metabolisms and containing DNA, comparing the genetics in all organisms, and also by the fossil record. First, since all organisms have DNA and achieve some sort of energy metabolism, whether it be cellular respiration, photosynthesis, or chemosynthesis, a magical coincidence either happened, or all modern organisms are descended from ancestors that had these attributes. Second, comparing genetics, that is, the DNA, shows that humans are most closely related to chimpanzees, then gorillas, orangutans, gibbons, catarrhines, platyrrhines, prosimians, tree shrews and colugos, gliders, laurasiatherians, afrotherians and xenarthrans, marsupials, monotremes, reptiles and birds, amphibians, fish, and on down the chain until we reach bacteria. Third, going into the fossil record shows that modern organisms haven't all lived together since the beginning of the Earth. Rather, modern organisms evolved from other organisms through time. For example, there aren't humans below the first apes, apes below the first primates, primates below the first mammals, mammals below the first reptiles, etc. Now, to end this segment, it has been shown on multiple occasions that Stephen Meyer has no concept of evolution outside his own creationist worldview, and one such example of this is paleontologist Donald Prothero's review of Meyer's book Darwin's Doubts, titled Stephen Meyer's Fumbling, Bumbling Amateur Cambrian Follies. I'd recommend the read, although it's a bit long.
The real problem with evolution is the third definition, and that's where all the tension lies. And this is called the blind watchmaker thesis. According to the blind watchmaker theory of evolution, the processes that gave rise to living things are totally naturalistic processes, and there was no room for God to do anything.
I really don't think this last definition of evolution, actually it's not a definition of evolution at all, has any problems whatsoever. No one has ever brought evidence saying that a deity of any sort is necessary for evolution at all. I also don't think this guy understands what, quote, the blind watchmaker is. The term has been used many times over the years, but it was popularized by zoologist Richard Dawkins to refer to natural selection, saying that evolution needed no oversight by a deity. In fact, Dr. Dawkins even wrote an eponymous book, which is an interesting read. This guy, on the other hand, seems to think that natural selection is contentious because it doesn't have mystical guidance. That isn't true at all. In fact, in the original version of this video, he said the exact opposite with his example about rabbits. He stated after defining microevolution that brown rabbits will unconsciously evolve white coats if they move to a snowy area. That is, the genes for a white coat will be naturally selected. If we don't need a deity to change the rabbits' coats after several generations, then we don't need a deity to change anything in biology. Also, I want to point out that there's no such thing as the blind watchmaker theory. No one has ever proposed that. The phrase is based on 18th century theologian William Paley's erroneous idea that a watchmaker mirrors evolution. For the third time, this concept isn't synonymous with evolution. All the definitions of evolution that they gave weren't definitions of evolution at all, but I suppose I'm not that surprised. Aside from more grammatical errors, perhaps I'm just being pedantic, the slide actually defines micro and macroevolution. I'm not sure what circulate changes within kinds means. I believe what they're trying to say is the age-old creationist argument that the finches would only change beak sizes in the presence of environmental changes, but they never change to non-finches. The finches can, however, show macroevolution through allopatric speciation, or speciating after moving to a new geographic location. Let's return to the word kind for a moment. I hope the author plans on defining this word because creationists throw it around often without any clear definition. You'll notice in this picture I'm using that kind has been defined two different ways by Ken Ham at once. Two show a taxonomic family, Canidae and Felidae, and the other is an order, Proboscidea. So, does kind mean family or order? Creationists have varying definitions of the word, so there is no general consensus among them as to its definition.
As the rains came back, the average beak size returned to normal. There was no net evolution. What we're really seeing is just one species oscillating back and forth with no real evolutionary change. So the evidence is exaggerated to make it appear to support Darwin's theory in a way that it really doesn't.
The contrary may be true. We may be seeing the development of entirely new species. The Galapagos finch starts off as a finch, and within 100 million years there'll be a Galapagos elephant. Could be.
First, he's assuming that he's seen every biology textbook out there by saying that the books failed to mention the beaks grow to normal sizes when the rain returns. As a matter of fact, I was taught in high school that the beaks return to normal size once the dry periods end, so he's essentially making up information. Second, what is net evolution, other than an Australian software company? Clearly, the birds went through microevolution when their beaks changed sizes because they not only evolved in one direction, but also evolved in another. This obviously supports evolution because what we see in the finches is those that have the beak sizes necessary to survive and reproduce perpetuate their species. Mutations with natural selection cause the survival or extinction of the finches. How is that not evolution? Oh well, creationists would say that the direct observation of speciation isn't evidence for evolution. But anyway. Third, this nonsense about Galapagos finches evolving into Galapagos elephants shows that the author and the speaker know nothing about evolution. This isn't the first time I've noted that the author doesn't understand anything about evolution, but what's so funny is that the author went to so much trouble to make a series, quote, debunking a subject he or she doesn't even comprehend. Such is creationism, I suppose. I've seen other videos by David Berlinski, and nothing he says makes me believe he understands evolution. He sounds like nothing more than another dyed-in-the-wool creationist.
Changes are temporary, they oscillate back and forth, and they don't go anywhere. So, as evidence for the origin of species, Darwin's finches really don't work.
Correct to an extent. Showing that finches microevolve over the course of a few years doesn't prove all organisms share a common ancestor. However, once we understand how and why finches evolve, then we can apply that to other organisms. Seeing that other organisms go through natural selection, we can inquire as to the degree of natural selection that they've gone through. And if it turns out that all organisms share certain characteristics that are able to be gained through natural selection, then we can extrapolate backwards towards an origin of similar species. After working out that similar organisms can come from a common ancestor, then we can branch out, going further and further away from our starting organisms. We can compare the genetic differences of different organisms, as I pointed out earlier, linking them all together until a phylogenetic tree has been created. Would you look at that? It's already been done.
Critics of Darwin's theory say that finch beaks provide a good example of micro-evolution, small changes within a species or gene pool. But it does not by itself provide evidence for macroevolution, which is the origin of fundamentally new organisms and body plans.
Correct on the bit about the finches showing microevolution, but that in itself not proving macroevolution. The video's new definition of macroevolution, however, is wrong. They should have just stuck with the previous definition. Macroevolution doesn't claim to give organisms totally new body plans because that would involve changing the Hox genes, which macroevolution doesn't necessitate. I've also never heard of a, quote, critic of Darwin's theory who wasn't a creationist. The reason for this is there isn't a single scientific argument against evolution, merely an emotional or exceptionally misguided one from people who neither understand nor want to understand evolution.
Microevolution is what we can demonstrate in the laboratory in real time of organisms changing due to different environments. The extrapolation, to macroevolution is a quantum leap.
We look at dogs, no matter how far back we go, it's dogs. And we look at bacteria, no matter what we do, they stay bugs. They don't change in their fundamental nature. There seems to be some sort of an inherent species limitation, and we have no good explanation for this in terms of a Darwinian theory. We should have far more flexibility, far more plasticity under laboratory conditions than we actually do if Darwinian theory or anything like that were correct.
Now the video is saying that we've never observed macroevolution. I'm going to venture a guess that that's their personal definition of macroevolution, not the actual scientific definition. We have observed speciation in various organisms, such as the three-spined stickleback, cichlids, mosquitoes, finches, California salamanders, the hawthorn fly, fruit flies, etc. Second, what is fundamental nature? I believe the creationists are using their old argument that no matter how long you breed an organism, it's never going to change into a wildly different organism. Well, given the amount of time that humans have been able to breed organisms, that's entirely true, since we've only been aware of artificial selection for a few thousand years. No one's going to change unicellular bacteria into anything more than that in just a few thousand years. The very fact that they're asking for that is indicative of their lack of knowledge of evolution. Also, what expertise does Berlinski have to offer on laboratory experiments? He's a creationism-spewing philosopher who worked for the Discovery Institute, not a scientist. As such, I'm curious to know where he gets his information.
I think that nature has been created to be able to modify itself and fitting the circumstances where living organisms are. We see a lot of variation potential in nature, but real novelties are not there. People talk about different species and speciation in nature. That's something that we can observe, but it is not the same thing as creating novel structures, novel information. I don't see that.
What are real novelties? Creationists keep using words and phrases that have no meaning, and then they've claimed they've won the argument. It makes no sense and is exceptionally dishonest. It's called goalpost shifting, and creationists use this fallacy all the time. Next, what are novel structures and novel information? Again, meaningless words. The name of this video provokes a lot of irony because it sets out to define its terms, but left the audience with even more confusion than they arrived with. This video was just as bad, if not worse, than the last one, which is to be expected from creationism. Also, no bingo again. Sorry. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.